220 Australian ecologists working in universities, government and industry answered our survey about constraints on their science communication, and what they told us is quite concerning. Ecologists reported direct suppression through pressure from colleagues, and 30% of survey respondents reported this, from senior staff, from ministers' offices, and due to workplace policy. This is a quote from a survey respondent.
We're often forbidden from talking about the true impacts of, say, a threatening process, especially if the government is doing little to mitigate the threat. In this way, the public often remains in the dark about the true state and trends of many species.
Another quote.
Due to risk management in the public sector, ministers are not receiving full information and advice, and this is being massaged by advisors.
Another respondent said,
I proposed an article in the conversation about the impacts of mining. The uni I worked at didn't like the idea as they received funding from the mining company.
75% of respondents reported indirect suppression and self-censorship. And this self-censorship came about as a result of fear of the media, and 61% of respondents reported this, fear for research funding, fear for job advancement, fear of being made redundant, stress. A small proportion said this was due to workplace devotion, and very few seem to hold the belief that scientists have no role in communication. One respondent said,
I have seen develop a secretive self-censorship approach by many companies for fear of losing work or losing employment.
Now, these pressures lead to undue modification and prohibition of scientific advice and communication. 30% of survey respondents reported prohibition, and 20% reported undue modification. One of them said,
Government staff are rewarded or penalised on the basis of complying with opinions of senior staff, regardless of evidence.
Another said,
the university actively avoids any mention of my study species or project due to vested financial interests in some key habitat.
Science suppression has consequences in three main areas. First is that it leads to failure of the science policy cycle. It leads to poorly informed policymakers and poorly informed policy. One respondent said,
Feels terrible to know the truth about impacts to the environment, but know you'll never get that truth to the public and that the government doesn't care at all. They want us to give them politically supportive information, not science.
The second area of impact is personal and professional impacts. 36% of respondents said that their job satisfaction was affected, and this included job insecurity and moral compromise. One said,
I declared the action unsafe to proceed. I was overruled and properties and assets were impacted. I was told to be silent or never have a job again.
Another said,
I know that the information would have affected management and policy, so I felt morally compromised to have to withhold that information. But my position in that company depended on it.
31% reported declining personal well-being. One said,
I would say it severely compromised the mental health of myself and another member of the office, and was a large contributor to both of us leaving.
42% report being harassed or criticised for public speaking. One said,
I was directly intimidated by phone and Twitter by a senior public servant.
Now, of those people who had been harassed or criticised, 83% believed the harassment was motivated by political or economic interests. The third area of impact is that science suppression erodes democratic processes. Now, 44% of all respondents said their experience of science suppression led to inadequate public debate and left the public uninformed. One said,
a project clearly had unacceptable impacts on a critically endangered species. The approvals process ignored these impacts. Not being able to speak out meant that no one in the process was willing or able to advocate for conservation or make the public aware of the problem.
Another said,
I felt frustrated at being an expert on a topic, yet standing back during debate on it.
Another person said,
I could see that social and media debate was exploiting the lack of information to perpetuate incorrect interpretations to further their own agendas.
So suppression of science communication, which happens through undue modification and prohibition of communication, has three areas of impact. It erodes democratic processes, it causes a failure of the science policy cycle, and it has personal and professional impacts. And all of these things lead to poor environmental outcomes. So what are some of the solutions to these problems? We could make occupational health and safety reforms to address workplace harassment. Media training would help build confidence among scientists in talking with the media. Codes of conduct are an important area for reform, and a good example that many jurisdictions could learn from is the Canadian Code for Scientific Integrity. And it's also important to document and report science suppression. But two major structural changes are needed to really fix up these problems in science suppression. It's important that universities stand together to uphold academic freedom. A second important part of the solution is to have independent environmental agencies which also manage environmental assessments.